about this time. Last week, Sunday, I had planned to set aside time, find a quiet place in the house, enjoy the CUF service on Zoom, close the door, listen to the music, really delve into the reflection and participate in the worship that way, because it's a valuable time for me, right? But Saturday night, the night before, without really thinking it through, I started texting a friend asking if she wanted to go for a run at Masahito the next morning. So we did. We decided to go at 8:30 Sunday morning. Another friend joined us and we ran through the trails. It was beautiful. The colors were changing every half mile, just like that hint of fall. And my dog was jumping in and out of the water, having a great time. Sometimes I was talking with my friends. Sometimes they got a little bit ahead of me and I could just sort of hear that they were there through the trees, but I was thinking to myself in the woods and looking around me. And I got back home feeling refreshed and feeling fully myself and in touch with the woods. But, looked at the clock and realized that I had burned a good chunk of the morning. As it goes, when you have young kids, you're always rotating on and off duties, right? So I needed to be back on duty with my young son so my spouse could get his bike ride in, which he needed. And that meant that my plan to fully participate and use the CUF worship on Zoom as a time for worship and reflection wasn't really going to happen. My son had a lot of energy. He needed to go to the playground or get out of the house. So the best I could do was put an earbud in and dial in on my phone and listen to the service. I heard most of Pastor Sarah's nice message. Don't apologize for having a body, she said. And I enjoyed it, but that's not really the worship that I'd planned, right? That's a different way of enjoying the service. And I realized as I was walking to the playground with my son what had happened, that I had inadvertently scheduled another type of worship, which was running through the woods with my friends and enjoying the beauty of that, and deprioritized this other type of worship. Both are valuable, but I hadn't thought it through and I couldn't have both fully that morning. But that got me thinking about the service that I wanted to do today, and especially around the theme of the water ceremony. It got me thinking about the ways that we worship, the ways that I worship, and how that might relate to water. Describing this, I'll borrow words from Rachel Begay, and I like to screen share that because I think some folks like to see rather than hear. So if you can see this green slide, it says, if you can appreciate the earth, you can appreciate the beauty of yourself. The same creator created both. And if I take care of that, I'll also take care of myself and help take care of others. So a simple reflection, but kind of maybe justifying or explaining that thing that happens when you feel the pull to go and appreciate the earth around you, as a way, I would call it a way of worshiping. So what I want to do is reflect just briefly on the ways that we worship and my personal experience. But then I want to save a lot of time in today's service for reflection from the group, because from what I saw my first time in the water ceremony last year, we all have a lot to say about water, and I'd like us to have time to do that together. But kind of beginning with what the way that we worship, or the way that I worship, what that means to me. For me, the ways that I worship have always been partly in nature and community. There was also this other piece. I grew up Presbyterian. Growing up Presbyterian was sufficient to make me feel like I knew right from wrong, but it was not entirely convincing otherwise as a form of worship and a form of understanding the world and growing spiritually. It didn't completely fulfill me, but that's just where I started. So as I matured through college and my 20s, I found community in ways that valued justice and the environment. Those seemed much more convincing to me. And I found those through non-denominational or interdenominational groups, or for a period, I went to some Quaker meetings, and then eventually through UU in Colorado, and now here. So that's like my faith's journey evolved, but thinking about it, worshiping in nature has always been there, despite where the specific community or formal group that I might have been exploring at that time. So worshiping in nature has always been a part of it. And for me, it's usually running, but I think we all move through nature in different ways based on our abilities and where we live. I find that when you move through nature, for me, again, usually running, you're learning something new. My favorite thing is to find a new trail that I've never been on before. You find that new trail, you observe, you think in your head. If you're with a pet or a friend, you can learn together. If you're not, you gain confidence in finding a place, learning a place on your own. This can be entirely inward looking time, right? It can be very, let's say, selfish, but it can also be bigger than that too. I'm going to borrow some wise words from another here, and I'll share those on the screen with you. So this is from Wendell Berry, who has a lot to say on topics like this. He says, I go among trees and sit still. All my stirring becomes quiet around me like circles on water. So I like the way that he recognizes what happens inside and the space that's there to think and be at peace when you are outside. It's part of this way that I worship. Water came in later because unlike maybe folks that grew up with an earshot of Lake Superior, I didn't. I grew up in central Wisconsin. So I grew up on a farm. We were kind of latecomers to swimming. I can swim, but I usually sink more than swim. And if I'm ever allowed to pilot a canoe, I usually end up going in circles because it's just not like a native part of, what I did as a kid or young adult. So I'm learning. But I did start creating, getting more of a connection to water when my mom would take us on trips up to this area. She would give us $5 to jump in Lake Superior throughout the summer. And that's, even in the early summer. And we did it. Like, of course, you'll take $5, right? That's a great gift when you're on vacation. Later, as I started planning my own trips as a young adult, I would bring friends up. We'd go to the Porkies, Bayfield, or the Keweenaw area. And so I took more ownership in, the Great Lakes and Lake Superior and its importance spiritually. Eventually, I became interested in terms of my studies, my academic studies, on the overlap between my primary work that I was doing in energy, because I'm a mechanical engineer, and the strong relationship between energy consumption and water consumption. So it started, I started getting more curious about actually learning about these things. I took just one course in water resource management in graduate school, and I was very happy to find out that if you look at a map of the Great Lakes Basin, I meant to show it here today, but I forgot to bring that slide. Maybe some of you know this, the Great Lakes Basin sort of, there's this weird inlet where it comes all the way down and swoops into Wisconsin. It almost looks like it's a mistake, like it's an unusual outcropping of the Great Lakes Basin. Maybe I'll pull that screen up later. But I zoomed in, and I realized that little inlet of the Great Lakes Basin, that's exactly where the farm that I grew up was. So though I may not have felt like I was as close to the resource and the but kind of sense of belonging around the Great Lakes, I was so happy to see that hydrologically, actually, I was part of that. My entire first 17 years of life, I was totally part of that water system. And that made me really happy. Now we live here, right? We live closer to water. I've actually learned how to paddle a sup. I can usually go in a straight line on a stand-up paddleboard. And I get to jump into Lake Superior unpaid. I don't need to be paid anymore. And I welcome my son to do the same, which he's happy to do. So to me, water is becoming part of that way to explore. It's a precious resource. I think of it as a gift from God, a responsibility to protect, an opportunity to learn, and a place to reflect. It's all of those things. And now it's part of that way that I worship too. One more set of wise words related here is, I think this is from Kenneth Patton, this blue slide, hopefully you can see. So it says, let us worship with our eyes and ears and fingertips. Let us love the world through heart, mind, and body. I've given you a longer reflection, and thanks for going on that journey with me, but that kind of gives you an idea of what water means to me. So we're going to break out into groups and give everyone a chance, but just to get things started, the water that I brought is a mixture. I view water as a resource partly, as I mentioned. So in this is a little bit of the leftover coffee from this morning, because that's really important to have something to make your coffee with, and a little bit of the play water that my son plays with outside, because we have this little mud kitchen where he can be outside in the quiet, away from screens, right? Playing with water, making a mess. And that's, I hope, becoming an important spiritual, maybe, or educational practice for him. So that's the water that I brought today. So I want to make sure that everyone has a chance to speak.